How do you resist cultural influences like greed or lust or any sort of pleasures like that?
Well, it's a cultural influence, but it's also, as I've tried to point out to you guys, part of my sinful nature. All right? Nobody has to teach me to be greedy. Comes very naturally. Now, there are many examples, though, in my culture, as in watching the news and movies, that influence me to be greedy, the advertising industry, etc. All right, so we've got myself, my sinful nature. We've got the culture, as you pointed out so well, Graham. We also have, I'm convinced, a personal being who's committed to evil, a spiritual being called Lucifer. M. Scott Peck, the great Connecticut psychiatrist, wrote a book called People of the Lie after he wrote the book The Road Less Traveled. And in his book, he's arguing that American psychiatry should have a branch of evil. But I really like this issue of motive and what really drives us. Graham, if you scratch my back, then I will scratch your back. Wow, that's pretty self-centered, isn't it? You better first scratch my back, and then I'll scratch yours. So we'll take a step forward. Graham, I'm going to scratch your back because I think that there's a higher probability that you will scratch my back if I scratch your back. Okay, we're moving a little towards a little more altruism, a little less self-centered. Graham, I'll scratch your back regardless. Even if you don't scratch my back tomorrow or whenever, I'll scratch your back. Okay, I think that's real love. I really want the best for you. I really want your good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now here's God's love. I'll scratch your back even if you stick the knife in my back. And that's what the cross of Christ is all about. God says, you basically stuck the knife in my back, rebelled against me, or ignored me, however we want to frame it.
Mm-hmm.
But I still love you so much that I sent my son Christ to bleed and die on a cross to pay the penalty for your wrongdoing, to forgive you. Now that's why I follow Christ. Really. It's not because of the logic. It's because when I'm confronted by love, I'm confronted by reality on a depth that I've got to respond. Because to be honest with you, my relationship with him, with his mother, with our two sons, with our daughters-in-law, with our grandchildren, far outpaces any logic, any scientific principle. It really is all about love. And once again, here's where Jesus comes in. Jesus says, yeah, the real purpose of life is to love God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Bingo. My experience of reality is spot on.
Why is it then that Christianity has been declining for the last 50 years, 40 years? Why is that?
It's growing faster than ever, oddly enough, because you're probably talking about in the West, because it has decreased some.
Correct.
But no, Christianity and Islam are going to take over the U.S. soon, 60% of the U.S. And so when I talk to Muslims, it's odd. They know this on college campuses. They'll be like, yeah, you and I, we're going to take over the U.S., largely because of immigration and growth in numbers, because generativity, Christians have more kids than atheists and agnostics. So it's growing, but it's growing like wildfire in Africa, China, South Korea, and Latin America.
Why is that?
I believe personally that that's connected to things like forgiveness. People are finding forgiveness, intimacy with God, a God who actually loves you, equality. So one of the fastest growing churches actually in the Middle East started by females. Let's talk about risk. That was one of the fastest growing churches in Iran. And why did they start that church? Why did they become Christian? Because they said, I was being abused by my husband. That religion says that men can do whatever they want to me. And I believe that we have equal value. And so I believe in Jesus Christ. And so they started this church and it just ballooned. So I think whenever there is tremendous martyrdom, whenever there is persecution, like in the underground church in China, there's going to be 100 million Christians in China, probably in the next 5 years, they're saying. I think the persecution is what's all of a sudden causing this explosion. And in Africa, in the last 100 years, it went from 2% to almost 50% Christian now. So a lot of it has to do with the poor. Jesus Christ calls the poor frequently, calls those who are humbling themselves. So that's why you have the Sermon on the Mount, Sermon on the Plain. One is more so about humbling ourselves actually in such a way where we're giving away money, where we're sacrificing for others relationally. And the other is more spiritual on humility. So I believe it's ultimately God working, but people are starting to say, hey, a lot of these things like we are all created equal, a lot of these things like forgiveness, our buddy Logan Paul said, I love the value of Christian forgiveness and the principle of it. And he had to forgive somebody. That's why he said somebody was really wronging him. But he said, I love this Christian idea of forgiveness. And I think we've seen a decrease in it ever since we've adopted the philosophy of you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. Because ultimately it's about, no, you better do this for me. I'm not going to really sacrifice for you and forgive you if you don't scratch my back, because we've set this type of principle up in place. And that's dangerous. So others, though, thousands of Muslims are becoming Christians in dreams. So there's all different kinds of ways that Christ is reaching people. And it's amazing how it's happening. And the Christian faith is still the biggest religion in the world. Atheism is declining in the US. It's going to go from about 13%, they're saying, all the way down to 8%. And so it's ballooning for different reasons, but it's really exciting stuff because I think you like you said, the principles of compassion, sacrifice, loving, all came from the Christian faith, beginning early in the Roman Empire.